How could an army of 185,000 well-trained, battle-hardened soldiers fall in a single night? Not to swords, not to spears, not to human hands, but to one celestial being. What kind of force could silence such a mighty multitude, leaving no survivors to recount the battle? This is not a tale of strategy or human ingenuity. It's a story of divine intervention, a moment when heaven reached down to earth and reshaped history. The Assyrian Empire, an unstoppable juggernaut, had surrounded Jerusalem, ready to crush the city and enslave its people. Their arrogance was unmatched, their confidence unshakable. But what they didn't realize was that their greatest battle would not be against men, but against the hand of the Almighty. In one night, an angel acted as the executor of divine justice, altering the fate of an entire kingdom. Who was this angel? What power did it wield to leave a battlefield silent and a king trembling in defeat? More importantly, why did this happen, and what message does it carry for us today? Stay with us as we uncover the untold details of one of the most dramatic interventions in human history, a moment when the supernatural clashed with the natural, and the impossible became reality. The Assyrian army, led by King Sennacherib, was no ordinary force. They were conquerors, feared across nations, leaving a trail of destruction wherever they marched. Their strategy was as ruthless as their reputation: surround, intimidate, and obliterate. When they set their sights on Jerusalem, the people of Judah knew what was coming, or so they thought. Sennacherib had sent a message to King Hezekiah, filled with mocking threats. He boasted of his past victories, naming the gods of other nations he had defeated. "Do not let your God deceive you," he declared, saying, "Jerusalem will not be given into the hands of the king of Assyria." Isaiah 37:10. To Sennacherib, the God of Israel was just another deity to be conquered. To Hezekiah, however, this was a challenge not to his kingdom, but to the sovereignty of the Almighty. Hezekiah, faced with the overwhelming force of Assyria, did what few leaders would. Instead of rallying his troops for a desperate fight or seeking alliances with neighboring nations, he went into the house of the Lord. In an act of utter dependence, he laid Sennacherib's letter before God and prayed, "O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see, and hear all the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God." Isaiah 37:16-17. The response was swift. Through the prophet Isaiah, God sent a message to Hezekiah, declaring that Sennacherib would not set foot in Jerusalem, nor would an arrow fly into the city. "I will defend this city to save it, for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David." Isaiah 37:35. These words, spoken against all human odds, would soon manifest in an event that defied explanation. That night, as the Assyrian army camped outside Jerusalem, prepared for the final siege, something extraordinary happened. The Bible describes it in just a few words. "Then the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies." Isaiah 37:36. The silent devastation was total. Soldiers who had marched with confidence were now lifeless, their weapons useless, their plans undone. What makes this event so striking is its simplicity. No battle was fought. No siege engines were deployed. One angel, acting on God's command, rendered an invincible army powerless in a single night. The Bible does not elaborate on how this happened, but the result was undeniable. The Assyrian threat was over, and Jerusalem was saved. Sennacherib, humiliated and defeated, returned to Nineveh. His arrogance had met the might of the God he mocked, and it cost him dearly. The once proud king, who had boasted of his conquests, was now a cautionary tale of what happens when one challenges the Creator. Years later, he would meet his own end, assassinated by his sons while worshiping in the temple of his god. Isaiah 37-38. This story is more than an account of historical events. It's a powerful reminder of divine sovereignty. The Assyrians had numbers, weapons, and strategy, but none of it mattered against the will of God. It teaches us that human power, no matter how vast, is no match for divine intervention. But it also raises deeper questions. Why did God choose to intervene in this particular moment? What was Hezekiah's role in securing this miraculous victory? And what does this tell us about the nature of faith and reliance on God in times of overwhelming odds? As we reflect on this story, it's impossible to ignore its relevance today. How often do we, like Sennacherib, place our trust in our own strength, thinking we are untouchable? And how often do we, like Hezekiah, find ourselves in situations where all we can do is lay our burdens before God and trust Him to act? The story of 185,000 soldiers defeated by a single angel is not just a narrative of destruction, it's a testament to the power, justice, and mercy of God. It's a call to humility, a reminder that no force on earth can stand against the plans of the Almighty. And most importantly, it's an invitation to trust in the one who defends His people, even when all seems lost. The question remains, when faced with the seemingly impossible, will we rely on our own strength, or will we, like Hezekiah, turn to the one who can do the unimaginable? This miraculous event leaves us with countless layers to explore. To understand its full significance, we must delve into the historical, spiritual, and theological implications. This isn't just about an angel and an army. It's about the intricate relationship between God, His people, and the forces of opposition. The historical context: the Assyrian Empire was one of the most powerful and feared entities of the ancient world. Their military campaigns were brutal, and their victories were swift. They prided themselves on their advanced war tactics and their ability to crush resistance. By the time they set their sights on Judah, they had already conquered the northern kingdom of Israel and scattered its people. Judah was next, and to most observers, it was only a matter of time. Sennacherib's invasion wasn't just a political or military move. It was an act of domination meant to send a message to the surrounding nations. The Assyrians wanted the world to know that no god could stand in their way. This arrogance is captured vividly in Sennacherib's own records, where he claimed to have caged Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. His confidence was unshaken until that fateful night. For the people of Judah, the siege wasn't just a military crisis, it was a spiritual test. Would they trust in God's promises, or would they succumb to fear? The stakes couldn't have been higher, and the outcome couldn't have been more unexpected. Hezekiah's response to the crisis sets a powerful example of faith in the face of overwhelming odds. Unlike his father, King Ahaz, who had sought alliances with foreign powers, Hezekiah turned to God. His actions were a testament to his trust in the covenant relationship between God and His people. When Hezekiah received Sennacherib's blasphemous letter, his first instinct wasn't to rally his army or seek help from Egypt. Instead, he went to the temple and laid the letter before God. This act of surrender wasn't a sign of weakness, but of strength. It showed that Hezekiah understood something the Assyrians didn't. The battle wasn't his to fight, it belonged to God. Hezekiah's prayer, recorded in Isaiah 37, is a masterpiece of humility and faith. He begins by acknowledging God's sovereignty over all nations and kingdoms, emphasizing that the God of Israel is not like the false gods of other nations. He then presents the problem, not as a personal grievance, but as an insult to God's name. Finally, he pleads for deliverance, not for his own glory, but so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord. Isaiah 37-20. This prayer reflects a deep understanding of God's character and His purposes. Hezekiah wasn't just asking for survival. He was asking for God to be glorified. The Bible describes the angel's intervention in minimal detail, but the impact was overwhelming. In one night, the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. The exact method is left to mystery. Some speculate it could have been a plague or some other natural phenomenon used supernaturally. Others believe it was a direct act of divine power beyond human comprehension. What we do know is that this was no ordinary angel. The term angel of the Lord often refers to a unique messenger of God, sometimes even a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, whoever this being was. Their authority and power came directly from God. The silence of that night stands in stark contrast to the noise of battle that might have been expected. No clashing swords, no rallying cries, just an eerie stillness as the Assyrian camp fell lifeless. This supernatural event was a clear message. God doesn't need human armies to accomplish His will. His power alone is sufficient. When morning came, the scene was unimaginable. The once mighty Assyrian army was reduced to silence, its soldiers lifeless where they had slept. Those who survived fled in terror, spreading the news of their defeat far and wide. Sennacherib, humiliated and shaken, returned to Nineveh, never to attack Judah again. The psychological impact on the surrounding nations must have been immense. The Assyrians, who had seemed invincible, were stopped not by a larger army, but by the god of a small, besieged city. This event would have reverberated across the ancient world, solidifying the reputation of the God of Israel as a force to be reckoned with. Sennacherib's fate was a fitting end to his story. Years after his retreat, he was assassinated by his own sons while worshipping in the temple of his god, Nisroch. This irony underscores the futility of trusting in false gods and human power. Sennacherib, who mocked the living God, was ultimately brought low by his own household. The story of the 185,000 soldiers defeated by a single angel is as relevant today as it was then. It challenges us to examine where we place our trust. Do we rely on our own strength, our resources, or our strategies? Or do we, like Hezekiah, turn to God in our moments of greatest need? This narrative also serves as a reminder of God's faithfulness. He doesn't abandon His people, even when the odds seem insurmountable. His power is not limited by human expectations, and His plans cannot be thwarted. But there's another layered to this story, a warning against pride. Sennacherib's arrogance led to his downfall, just as it has for countless others throughout history. When we exalt ourselves above God, we set ourselves on a path to destruction. Yet, when we humble ourselves before Him, we open the door to His grace and power. As we reflect on this story, we're faced with a choice. When the battles of life surround us, whether they're physical, emotional, or spiritual, how will we respond? Will we panic and rely on our own understanding? Or will we lay our burdens before God, trusting in His sovereignty? The angels' victory over the Assyrian army is a glimpse of God's ultimate power, a reminder that He is always in control. It's a call to surrender our fears, our plans, and our pride to Him. Knowing that He fights for His people, the question remains, will you trust the one who can do the impossible? Or will you, like Sennacherib, place your faith in the fleeting power of this world? This story of divine intervention is not just a historical event confined to the pages of the Bible. It is a timeless reminder of who God is and how He operates in the lives of those who trust in Him. But to grasp its deeper meaning, we must explore the spiritual principles that emerge from this extraordinary narrative. Each element of the story reveals something profound about God's character, His relationship with His people, and His ultimate plan for humanity. Hezekiah's posture before God is one of complete humility, in the face of an impossible situation. He didn't seek to assert his own authority or wisdom. Instead, he acknowledged his dependence on God. This act of laying the letter before the Lord was more than a symbolic gesture. It was an act of surrender, a way of saying, "This battle is not mine, it's yours." This principle is echoed throughout Scripture. In James 4:10, we are reminded, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up." Hezekiah's humility allowed God to move in a way that was unmistakable, demonstrating his power and glory, not only to Judah but to the surrounding nations. Prayer, in this story, becomes the bridge between human desperation and divine action. It's not about eloquent words or perfect timing. It's about a heart fully yielded to God. Hezekiah's prayer wasn't a last resort, it was his first response. This challenges us to evaluate our own approach to prayer. Do we see it as a lifeline, or do we treat it as an afterthought when all else has failed? The destruction of the Assyrian army is a dramatic demonstration of God's sovereignty over the nations. While Sennacherib believed his power was unmatched, God showed him otherwise. Psalm 2:1-4 captures this dynamic perfectly. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. God's sovereignty is not limited to ancient times. Even today, nations rise and fall under his watchful eye. Leaders may boast of their power, but ultimately, they are subject to his will. This should both comfort and challenge us. Comfort, because we can trust that God is in control, even when the world seems chaotic. Challenge, because it reminds us that no human authority is ultimate, only God's. The angel's role in this story is a glimpse into the unseen spiritual realm. Angels are often described in the Bible as messengers and agents of God's will. And here we see the incredible power they possess when acting under his command. Hebrews 1:14 tells us that angels are ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation. The fact that one angel could decimate an entire army speaks to the immense power of the spiritual forces at God's disposal. It also reminds us that the battles we face are not merely physical. As Paul writes in Ephesians 6:12, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." This perspective calls us to engage in our own spiritual battles with the same reliance on God that Hezekiah demonstrated. Through prayer, faith, and the power of God's word, we have access to resources far greater than anything this world can offer. The defeat of the Assyrian army is a powerful example of God's justice. Sennacherib's arrogance and blasphemy demanded a response, and God delivered it in a way that left no doubt about his authority. Yet, even in his justice, God's mercy shines through. He could have allowed Judah to be destroyed, as they certainly weren't a perfect nation. But because of Hezekiah's faith and the promises made to David, God chose to spare his people. This balance of justice and mercy is a recurring theme in Scripture. It points us forward to the ultimate demonstration of both Jesus Christ. On the cross, God's justice against sin was satisfied, and his mercy was extended to all who believe. The angel's victory over the Assyrians is a shadow of the greater victory Christ would achieve over sin and death. At its core, this story is a call to trust in God's power and promises. Hezekiah's faith was not in his own ability to strategize or negotiate. It was in the unshakable character of God. This trust was not blind optimism, but a confidence rooted in God's past faithfulness and his revealed word. In our own lives, we face challenges that may feel as insurmountable as the Assyrian army. Whether it's a personal crisis, a global issue, or a spiritual struggle, the temptation is often to rely on our own strength. But this story reminds us that true victory comes when we place our trust in the one who is able to do immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine. Ephesians 3:20, the story of the angel and the Assyrian army, doesn't just look back to a moment in history. It also points forward to a future promise. The Bible tells us that one day, God will bring final judgment on the forces of evil and establish his eternal kingdom. Revelation 19 describes the return of Christ as a conquering king. leading the armies of heaven to defeat the powers of darkness once and for all. In this ultimate victory, we see the culmination of what was glimpsed outside the walls of Jerusalem. The same God who defended his people then will one day make all things new, wiping away every tear and erasing every trace of sin and death. Revelation 21:4. As we consider the magnitude of this event, the challenge is not just to admire it, but to allow it to shape our lives. What does it look like to live with the kind of faith Hezekiah demonstrated? How can we trust God in our own battles, knowing that He is the same yesterday, today, and forever? Perhaps the answer lies in the simple yet profound act of surrender. Like Hezekiah, we are called to lay our fears, our burdens, and our plans before the Lord, trusting that He will act in His perfect time and way. This doesn't mean life will always be easy, or that every problem will disappear overnight. But it does mean that we can rest in the assurance that God is with us, fighting on our behalf. The story of 185,000 soldiers who couldn't defeat a single angel is more than a tale of divine power. It's a reminder of God's unwavering commitment to His people. It's a call to trust, a challenge to humility, and an invitation to walk in faith. As we face the battles of today and the uncertainties of tomorrow, may we, like Hezekiah, turn to the one who holds all things in His hands and declare with confidence, "The battle belongs to the Lord." 1 Samuel 17:47. The final lesson from this remarkable story is the unchanging truth about God's character. The same God who defended Jerusalem against the Assyrian Empire is the one who walks with us today. His power has not diminished, His promises remain steadfast, and His willingness to fight for His people is as real now as it was then. This truth should fill us with awe and courage, knowing that no matter how overwhelming the odds may seem, we are never alone in the battle. What happened that night outside Jerusalem was more than an act of deliverance. It was a declaration that no earthly power, no amount of human strength or arrogance can stand against the will of God. It was a moment that revealed the boundless authority of the Creator and the incomparable love He has for His people. As we conclude, let us reflect on the question this story poses to each of us. Where is your trust placed? In your own strength, in the fleeting powers of this world, or in the eternal God who commands the hosts of heaven? This story isn't just about 185,000 soldiers and an angel. It's about a God who fights for His people, who hears the cries of the humble, and who acts with precision and purpose. It's about the assurance that, no matter how great the enemy, God's power is greater still. Let this truth echo in your heart. The God who sent one angel to deliver a city is the same God who holds your life in His hands. And with Him, no enemy, no obstacle, no force can prevail.